Hey, folks, we're going to the comments. This is from Beanbag59, and the question is, how do you think like a programmer? I hear different takes on it, like keep the end in mind while building your project. I've heard go line by line, so I'm curious to hear your take on it. So thanks, Beanbag, for sending this in. Just a reminder, if you have questions, leave them below in the comments, or look for Dev Leader on social media if you have something that's maybe a little bit longer, you want to keep that anonymous. Dev Leader's also my main YouTube channel, so if these videos are too ranty for you, that channel has a lot of edited down videos. You might like that better. And there's more like programming tutorials and stuff as well, so you can go check that out. But to Beanbag's question. So this is interesting. I actually don't know the context here. So I'm going to give you my take on what I think that this is meaning, but this is certainly from my experience not it's not like a saying that I like regularly come across like oh like I took that to heart when I started programming 20 years ago or something. So I might have a different take on this than maybe as I'm going through this I'll do a quick search because I'm filming this at home. I have a bunch of YouTube videos and stuff that I have to crank through for my main channel, and I figured I'm going to try to get some of these questions answered. So I'm going to pull up a browser, and just in case, I might be able to jump over. But I want to kind of give you my take on it first. So the keep the end in mind and go line by line to me are talking about different things when I think about what I believe they mean. And the keep the end in mind part, I think, is a very interesting one. This is probably something that feels a little bit more relatable to me. Go line by line also does if I change the context. So let me elaborate a little further. When I think of keep the end in mind, what I'm thinking about is like big picture. Okay. So when we're programming things, this is why it feels like it's going to be at odds with go line by line, by the way. So hear me out. When we're building things and we are, building parts of systems and stuff like that, it's, it can be overwhelming, especially for more junior people where it's harder to keep the pieces of the system like in their head and how these things all work together. You might be like focused on a very narrow scope of code, a certain module, a class, like depending on what you're building, you pick the words you want to use, but like a smaller piece of the puzzle. And you might be focused on that. You might be trying to perform, just to give you an example, maybe you're trying to optimize the user experience and you're focused on one particular area and you're optimizing this area over and over. But when you're not thinking about like the bigger picture, you're not realizing that maybe it doesn't make sense to be hyper optimizing this one spot. If we zoom out, we might be able to think about like what is our actual goal, right? Like our actual goal is to optimize this, experience for the user. Maybe what you're looking at is a hotspot, but the other thing might be if you sort of do things in a different way, you can avoid that code path altogether, just as an example. So that's not necessarily keeping the end in mind, but it's just an example of zooming out of an area of code so you can have like more of the big picture in your head. So I like to think of keep the end in mind when we're building stuff out, right? Same type of idea. If we're thinking about where we want to get to, I think that's the important part, and we should be trying to move in that direction. Um, Another sort of way that I like to think about this is like from my experience, like I think it might be, I don't know, more common for people to think, hey, like we want to have a perfect architecture, we want the code base to be clean, everything's got to be perfectly tested, like all these things we have in mind, but they're not like it's not reality like ever. So if we're thinking about where we want to go, so again, keep the end in mind. Where do we want to go? I think as long as we're moving in that direction, that's positive. And sometimes that means that we're moving in that direction, but we're not taking that perfect step forward. It's like a half step, right? So you might get closer to delivering value to customers in whatever you're building. It's such a generic way to say it, sorry, but you're shipping a feature and you didn't have time to go like rewrite the part of the code base, but you shipped the feature, and like that's ultimately moving you at least in the direction forward, right, of getting the product to a state you want it to be in, but it's not the full step. So it's still progression. And I think as long as we're thinking about that, then we can try to factor in, like, at some point, if you're accruing tech debt like that, you will say like, hey, look, like any step we take forward is like any step we try to take at this point is going to feel like it's not forward. Like, the now the tech debt is becoming overwhelming, so taking a step in this direction is like it's just not forward anymore. But I think that when I think of keep the end in mind, it's like about zooming out, bigger picture stuff, so that we're not so focused on like just the one small spot. By the way, I am going to Google this in just a moment. I just figured I wanted to get this video rolling because I don't edit these ones. So you got to kind of deal with it. And then the other part on go line by line, for me, this is more about like debugging things. That's how I'm thinking about it. We're trying to understand how something's working. So it to me it feels a little bit at odds with the other one because I was saying, hey, zoom out, get the big picture, don't hyper focus on one spot. But when we talk about go line by line, like especially from the context of debugging, you might be looking at some code and you're like, well, like here's a class and there's a method in here and it says it does this, and as I scan through the method, I'm like, yeah, like I get the idea of what it's doing. So like, I don't see the problem. Let's keep going. But like at some point you have to start going like truly line by line and saying like, you know, this method says it's doing this, right? This is what the intention is. The variables are named this way, the method calls are named this way, but like what is actually happening? Because computers don't just like make problems for us. It's not like they're just like magic and like, oh, look, like a bug appeared here. Like it's because the computer's magic and haunted or something. It's no, like computers literally just do what they're told. So when we're trying to investigate problems and debug things, it's like we as humans have written code that will do something. It's converted into instructions for a machine to run, and our own perspective or our intentions may not be exactly what is created in the end. So when we're going through line by line, you're able to, in my opinion, like that's what I would say to someone, like to go, truly understand where something's breaking down and not working. So like that's how I would look at those two things, and they're both valuable, but I use them in different contexts. So that's what I mean. I have my browser open. You can probably still hear me if I keep this mic down on my desk. I'll talk a little louder, but I'm gonna search programmer, go line by line. And I'm seeing like on Reddit, follow execution line by line, go line by line and loop. Do lexers have to go word by word or can they go line by line? How to debug your code like a pro, right? Go line by line. So yeah, I feel like the go line by line part is like really to like understand and break down what's going on in code. But let's see what the other one is, just according to the internet with a 2-second search. So keep the end in mind. Maybe maybe this isn't. Okay, this one I might have to open this and not just rely on the Google search. I don't know who this person is, but let's see. So part of their blog post, they're talking about extreme programming relies heavily on automated tests to ensure code quality. It also encourages team-oriented approach. Then they say, though each approach has different philosophies, techniques, and tools, they all share some basic principles. Start with what you know, keep the end in mind, and don't make things more complicated than necessary. There's only one spot in this whole blog article, which, like I said, I don't know who the person is. It's a pretty lengthy blog article. It's called "The Productive Developer." I don't know. This is by Brendan Matos. I don't know. Maybe I'll say the name and people in the comments will be like, "Oh, you don't know who that is?" Maybe I'll search who that is. But in their article, they only reference it the one time. No, I'm not gonna. There's like an athlete named the same thing, and I'm assuming it's not the same person. So anyway, I suspect that I'm probably not too far off with what that means, but I think that's my take on what those two are. So we'll keep this one pretty short. I don't really have much more to add, but I do appreciate that. If other people are watching this and you're like, nah, man, like, here's what it means. If you guys have different thoughts on the interpretation of keep the end in mind and the other one is go line by line, leave them in the comments. Would love to hear about it. I'm happy to go make a follow-up video if there's like tons of different discussion on like what's going on with these two phrases. Maybe I missed the mark completely, but that's my interpretation of them. So thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. And like I said at the beginning, if you have questions, leave them in the comments or look for Dev Leader on social media. And I'll see you next time. Take care.